Here's the opening range recap for July 2024. Dow plus 37 points, just a couple of dates where it traded. Again, a reminder, the ones in red are not counted in the totals here. So Dow just a couple, NQ 103 points, and then a couple in red here, which we'll talk to you about in a minute. In the S&P, 14 and a quarter points, with a couple in red as well. So 2 days, as we mentioned, with this particular trade idea, works very well, except for trying to avoid the big days can be really big against you. And there's some things you can look for, which we talked about in previous videos and so forth. But a couple of big days here on the 11th and 12th. So let's go over those in a little more detail. So the 11th, for the NQ, I have ugly and ugly here. It was a decent size opening range, just under 33 points. But the market just down, and just never bounced. So pivot number 1 was a win for both, and then pivot 2, pivot 3, pivot 4, pivot 5 were all losers for both. So at 10:11 a.m., the pivot was 20,804. And then by the 5th, that was pivot 2. By the 6th pivot, the market was at 20,673. So you had dropped in 9 minutes. You had dropped 130 points or so in the NQ, and just never recovered, never bounced in those 9 minutes enough to get a win. So I don't have any particular notes on that as far as there was news or any of that kind of stuff. It just was one of those things. So but anyway, so on the 25%, your first entry would be pivot 3, which lost. Next entry, pivot 4, which lost. Next entry, pivot 5, which lost. It would have to be the 6th pivot. So you're talking, that would be your 4th entry for this. Not wise, and you'd have to have a massive account in order to do that. For 50%, pivot 4 is actually your first entry there. That lost, and the next one lost as well, so it'd be the 3rd entry for the 25 and the 50%. Bounced at 10:20, so again, 10:19, it was 705.75. The next minute was pivot 6, so, and that's where it finally bounced. So really quickly, really down, really fast. Again, you can avoid those, great. If you can't, they can blow out accounts real quick. So that's the 11th for the NQ. We'll go with the S&P in just a minute. And then for the 12th, a little bit more normal here. But the reason it's 10.25 and it's in red is because pivot number 3 lost, or excuse me, pivot number 3 lost, which makes pivot number 4 a 25% most trade. However, the pivot number 3 missed its exit by 1 tick. So if you throw that into the win column, then you wouldn't have had pivot number 4, which means you wouldn't have that. That's why anything in red is never added to that. So if you want to go officially exactly the way the rules are, then you can add the 10 points to the total here if you so desire. But that's the reasoning for that. All right, so the S&P, let's go. It's interesting that they both were on the same day. So obviously something going on that particular thing. But for the 11th, for the S&P, you have S&P break even over 2 trades, and then the 50% was a win for 2.5. points. The reason why I have it as in red is because pivot number 2, you missed the exit by 1 tick. Otherwise, it's a win. And you would not have had that particular trade. So then the pattern would have been a win for pivot number 1, win for pivot number 2, a loss for pivot number 3, which makes pivot number 4 a most safe entry, and you would have made 1.25 points. So officially, it's break even. The way you would probably most people would normally trade it would be plus 1.25, and you would only had one trade on the 25%. 50% was normal, and that's why it's in black like that. And then the 12th, both the S&P and the S&P 25% and the 50% were both ugly. You had you actually had 5 pivot hits, and they all were just misses. So pivot number 1 lost both 25 and 50. So pivot number 2 would be a 25% most safe entry. You actually missed. You were winning, but you missed the exit by 2 ticks. So if you want to take the whole loss, you would take the whole loss, and then you would enter on pivot number 3, triple up on pivot number 3. Problem is, pivot number 3 was a loser for both. And then pivot number 4, you missed the entry by 1 tick earlier and got to the 25%. But the official entry was a loss for both. And then finally, you'd had to wait all the way to 11:06 to get additional entry. So you lost 4 pivots in a row. One was due to just missing the exit. If you would have hit that exit, you would have had a win of 1.75 points. And then the next one would have been break even on that particular thing. The 50% was you had to triple up on that particular one as well. So ugly on those particular 2 days. Again, as I mentioned, nice little trade idea if you can avoid the ones where the markets just go, straight down. It's usually in the down direction when you're going to have those, or you have a really small opening range, and then the markets get wild. So for the NASDAQ, for example, if the opening range has been 35, 40 points each day for the week, and then suddenly it's only 22 points the next day, and the market then decides to get wild, you can have a problem really quickly. So anyway, depending on how you traded it, could be good, could have blown out accounts, but that's the information, and hope you like it. If you have any comments, drop them in the comment box, and have a good rest of your month.